Can everyone hear me? In the back? Yeah? Okay. Yay. All right. I'm here to talk about humanist disaster recovery teams. As Ben just mentioned, in 2013 at FreeOK, I approached Dale McGowan about getting involved in creating a volunteer program for the humanist community. But first I'm going to start off by telling you how did I end up accosting Dale McGowan at FreeOK, because that didn't come out of nowhere, and it actually came out of a story that drives me in so many ways, and I'm going to try to get through it without crying. So wish me good luck, because sometimes the tears do flow, but then I'll go to the rest of the presentation, which is awesome. There's a happy ending to the story. So what ended up happening, a lot of people know that my house was destroyed, and then the next day I went viral with Wolf Blitzer and, for saying I was an atheist. But what people don't know is about a week later in my home, I had volunteers who were helping me. The end of the day, that day, they were going to be coming with the bulldozers to take away everything, and we had to have everything shoveled down to the curb so that it could be taken away. So this were the last minutes that I had to do anything that I could in my house that I felt like I needed to do. And so I had some people there who were helping me get what I needed done, because I didn't have enough hands to get done what I wanted to get done. And what I really wanted to get done, I was going through my son's belongings. I had set aside all of this clothing to go through because I was going to clip out everything and make this quilt. And so I had these memories, like I didn't just have the memories of me with my baby, I had this future plan of all this time I would spend making the quilts, and whenever I was an old woman, I would look at it and remember my baby. I get emotional like that. I plan things and projects. So I'm going through this, and this old woman who was near me, she might have been in her 60s, and she said, "So which church do you go to?" And I did not want to drop an A-bomb on this lady. So I said, "Oh, I don't go to church." And she said, "You're raising this baby without Jesus." And I, just thinking about that still hurts. This is the part. Just let me, I gotta settle back down. Okay. She sucks. Right. It's true. It's very true. And so I ended up saying, yep. I certainly am. I didn't know what to do. And I also couldn't tell her to go away. I needed to get this done. In my head, I was like, if I could just get this done, I wanted to take pictures of all the little things. I didn't know what I was going to do with the pictures, but internally I knew that if I took those pictures, I would feel better. And I just wanted to feel better. One of these little scraps that made me feel like I could handle what was going on. And so I needed to take these pictures. And so instead of getting her to go away, she just, I didn't. I was just like, yep. And then she went on for 30 minutes telling me how God had put her in my life, how she was there. He sent her to me to bring me back home to him and to bring my son back into his love. And it was, she was there to inspire me to be blah, 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 blah. That's how it felt. I was, at this point, I'm just like, I would tell you to get the F out of my house if I could, but instead I needed something that I could do internally so I could still smile and get this woman's help. So instead I started thinking, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to volunteer. I'm going to volunteer for a disaster recovery, relief program. I'm going to be involved in that. I need to find these people tonight and make sure that they're not doing this to somebody else, because this is terrible. So if they're trying to tell someone else, right? I wanted to make sure our community wasn't doing something horrific to survivors. And so just at the very end, when she was about to leave, she said, "Well, I hope I've inspired you." And I said, "You have." She has. I'm here. So that night, I got online and I started saying, trying to figure it out. What are the right keywords? And maybe I'm just not putting it into Google correctly. And I started to discover this didn't exist. And I was like, oh no, because as an atheist, I love to think about the world without religion, right? don't you? Like, a world without religion, wouldn't that just be puppies, kittens, and rainbows, you know? Like, I sometimes feel, at least compared to this, you know? Well, I started thinking, how can we do this without being able to respond to disasters? How can you have a thriving, you know, community and life if you can't take care of something like this? And we don't have any avenue for that. So that got my wheels turning, and so now I'm gonna go in. That's what started this. That night, whenever I was like, it doesn't exist, oh my gosh, it has to. And so I started looking into what does non-theistic disaster recovery look like? Because there is non-theistic disaster recovery. That does exist. What is missing is a national program that's prepared, and whenever a disaster occurs, we enact our national program, and then we go and bring people to disasters. We don't have that. And I'm going to first talk about what it looks like outside of our community, and then I'll talk about what it looks like within our community, because those look super different. So I'll go ahead and go with, this quote came from Joe Klein. I know some of you remember Joe Klein. He had the article, he had the cover of Time magazine 1 month after the tornado that destroyed my house, right around the time that my wheels were turning and everything like that. He came out with this, and he said, there was an occupying army of relief workers led by local first responders, exhausted but still humping it a week after the storm. Church groups from all over the country. Funny how you don't see organized groups of secular humanists giving out hot meals. This guy, oh, I can't stand this guy. You know, like that funny how you, there's no way that you can read that without a mocking tone. He is mocking secular humanists. Funny how you don't see secular humanists out there. You know, he's making it sound as though we don't want to be out there, or we have a way to be out there and we're just not utilizing it, or we say we're good and everything, but where are we during disasters, you know? And it's ridiculous to think of it that way. Whenever when he's comparing secular humanists to other organizations, he's comparing us to organizations that have been around, well, religions that have been around for thousands of years, and he's also comparing us to these organizations that have been working specifically in disaster relief for decades, and he's basically saying, you guys don't have any infrastructure, you know? Sometimes when I think of this, I think about a teenager who's making fun of a 5-year-old because he's not as fast. It's like, catch up, 5-year-old. You know, and it's ridiculous to do that. We are the 5-year-old. We're a young community. We are growing and growing and growing. I know in Oklahoma Atheist, you guys have one of the best atheist communities I've ever been a part of. And still, we run into these little things to build a community. You have growing pains, and you have rules, and you're like, oh, we would have never thought of that. Let's tack on that rule too. You know, and as we grow and grow and grow, we're building that kind of infrastructure that they've been growing for years and decades and thousands of years, you know. And so to make fun of us for not being able to run as fast as a teenager is just oppressive and kind of terrible. But he's right and wrong in his assumptions here, because he is right that we don't have a national disaster volunteer database that we're pulling from in an organization that's devoted to this from the humanist community. He got that right. He's wrong that organized groups of secular humanists weren't on the ground. Oklahoma Atheists were there, FreeOK was there, and they were devoting their time and helping people on the ground. So within the community, we do know that we're there. We just aren't visible. So within the community, we have disorganized individual volunteering. These are called spontaneous volunteers. People frown about this in disaster recovery and response. They're like, you know, they'll try to make up for people doing this, but it's not ideal because these systems are labored. They've been destroyed. They're devoid of infrastructure and resources, and to have people come in that you're not prepared to receive, you have to provide food, water, shelter, all of these things, and so it's laboring an already labored system. This is definitely not ideal, but this is a route that a lot of atheists take because they don't have anything else. The next thing is silent non-theists working with through theistic organizations. I hear this one all the time where people say they don't lie, they just don't say anything. They're just like, hi, I would like to volunteer. They realize that they need to be part of a system to be able to go in and be a part of the system the way they should be, but they don't have a system to be a part of, so they do what they have to. And then finally, there are local organizations such as FreeOK, AOK, things like that, who are responding in their backyard. This is very important. You have to have local organizations, because not only are they the only ones involved in first response, because you don't have people who are coming from other states involved in the immediate first response, you also have them carrying it on into the long-term recovery. And that's very important. So this is an amazing thing that we do have. But, right, we don't have what he's talking about here. And it's the same thing that I realized that night when I got on the computer and I tried to be, I thought I was going to come into something that had been built for years, and I just give them a little tidbit of information and become a volunteer. That's what I thought I was going to do. But that didn't exist. So I started kind of panicking a little bit. And I started emailing lots of people, anybody who I thought might have some kind of input. What can I do? Who can I talk to? I can't do this by myself. Clearly, I can't do this by myself. I'm not skilled. All I knew was the need and the problem. And so finally, I talked to Christy Dawson. She is the founder of Oklahoma Secular Parenting, and she told me, well, Del McGowan is coming for FreeOK, and I think you should talk to him. Do you know anything about Foundation Beyond Belief? And I thought, well, I know Del McGowan writes secular parenting books, but no, I don't know anything about Foundation Beyond Belief. So that night, I got on the computer and started to look at Foundation Beyond Belief, and I was so excited, you guys. The first thing I saw was Beyond Belief Network. So FreeOK is actually a member of Beyond Belief Network, but what Beyond Belief Network is teams of volunteers throughout the country who are reporting back the number of hours they're spending in their local communities, so that whenever you look, you can have a picture painted of what humanists are doing across the country. Right now, there's 112 teams in more than 30 states. They've donated over 50,000 hours so far in their local communities. And this is just a fraction of what's actually being done. As we have more and more and more teams submitting their hours and joining and saying, I want to be a part of that picture, it becomes more and more of a clear picture of what's happening and what we're really doing. And then the next program that I saw was Crisis Response. Now this was collecting donations for secular organizations working on the ground after disaster. Usually these are things like food banks. It's not talking about a humanist disaster volunteer program or anything like that, but a food bank or something like that fits into this. And I looked at this and I thought, oh my gosh, they don't even know. They have everything. Because they had a focus on disasters and they had a focus on volunteers. Disaster volunteers. And so I basically decided I need to accost this man and convince him that I'm not crazy very quickly, right? I was like, how do I, quickly pitch, hey, you need to take your entire organization in this direction from a person you've never met. But so I spent the next couple of weeks just, deciding exactly all of the words that I needed to say to make him understand, you have everything already here. You just need to build this infrastructure, and I'm on board, and I'll give you all the time in the world, And so I met him, and as it turns out, he said, Noelle George, who, by the way, just replaced him at the beginning of June, had already come to him before and said that she thought that this was a direction that Foundation Beyond Belief could go. And I was so excited because I didn't even have to convince him. That made it way easier, because I was like, okay, I will just donate all of my time to you guys, and that's what I started doing. They brought me on as development coordinator for the program, and we've created HDR teams, Humanist Disaster Recovery Teams. Yay! So I would be completely remiss here if I didn't mention Samantha Montano. She is getting her doctorate in emergency management, and she has come on in 2014 and started really giving us direction for the program. I have a ton of time, and I can put in, I'll put in 50 hours in a week of volunteer time because I just need this to happen, and I'm driven. But she is the one who can tell us what needs to actually happen. So Humanist Disaster Recovery Teams, what our mission is to provide recovering communities with disaster volunteers trained in a humanistic approach. I'm going to go over that a little bit later. The way we're going to do it is by providing evidence-based training integrated with humanistic values. So these are two separate things. There's the evidence-based approach that's based on female rules and regulations and books and knowledge and science and everything that Samantha Montano embodies. And then there's the humanistic values, and that is the change. That's the thing that we're bringing that hasn't been done before. And I'm going to go over each of these, and I feel as though it's easy to understand what humanism can really bring to disaster recovery, and we're excited to be able to do it. So first of all, I'm going to start with the evidence-based approach. The first thing that you have to understand in doing a program like this is the difference between response and recovery. Response and recovery, whenever I was a survivor of the tragedy, those are the same thing to me. I don't, is there a difference? Really? I don't, you know, they sound the same. Relief, response, disaster, meh. But there is a difference, and there's an evidence-based approach to each. So I'm going to start off with response. So in response, the types of things that are going over first is evacuation. That's getting people into a place of substantial safety. If there was an earthquake, it would be getting people away from buildings that could potentially collapse if there was an aftershock. Next is securing resources. Right at the moment that a disaster happens, immediately your infrastructure is crippled. You don't have a way to get resources the way you usually do. We're not all farmers. We go to the grocery store. The grocery store is destroyed. You know, and there's no trucks that are coming in and bringing these resources for all of the people who usually go to these grocery stores and get them. So immediately, this has to be taken care of. Next is search and rescue. I think we all know what search and rescue is, but it's in the response phase. Recovery doesn't begin until after this is complete. Medical intervention, these are all things that can't wait. These are immediate needs. You can't wait. If you have a broken arm, you're not going to wait a week for some volunteer to show up. You need that taken care of immediately. And then finally, debris removal to clear paths for aid. Now the thing about all of these is we're not going to be doing any of these. That's where we're humanist disaster recovery teams. We come in after. This is all taken care of by a local community. The way that FEMA has regulations and everything set up and their suggestions on how you're supposed to do it is a local community is supposed to sustain itself for 72 hours and take care of these kinds of things before they start allowing people from the outside to come in and begin the recovery work. We are the people who are coming in from the outside. We're not the local community, we're the outside community coming in, because after a disaster you have to have people from the outside because the disaster is too large to be able to take care of with just a local community. So I'll go over real fast what things look like when things go wrong. So 9/11, a lot of things kind of went wrong. They had 40,000 unsolicited volunteers show up. Those are the spontaneous volunteers that I just mentioned a little while ago. What that ends up doing is it overwhelms the volunteer management. They're focused on immediate needs, immediate. I need to make sure that people have food, water, shelter, these kinds of things. And whenever an unsolicited volunteer comes in, the very first thing they always do is say, I'm here to help, put me to work. That's a problem. It's a problem because they don't know what they're doing. Well, you shouldn't be there if you don't know what you're doing. You shouldn't go in and demand that somebody takes their time away from these immediate needs to be able to give you something to do. And so survivors are also in need of trained volunteers. If you have training and you know that you're a part of the response efforts and you know what you're doing and you know exactly how to go about it, of course you're supposed to be there. I'm talking about the people who have no idea what they're doing, they just flock because they're like, I need to go help them, because internally that's a human response. I need to go help them. And if it's your neighbor, that's fine. You probably do need to help your neighbor. That's a local community thing. I'm talking about coming in from the outside. So then there's resource depletion. Like I said, the immediate area is no longer receiving resources the way it normally does. Now it has 40,000 more people to take care of. As each person comes in, they're in need of food, water, shelter. All of those people. And all of the people who survived are now in need of all of those things as well. So you have to wait until those things are in place. And then valuable time is devoted to creating tasks. I just talked about that a moment ago with the volunteer management being, they need to be able to focus on the immediate needs. And then finally, medical care for those injuring themselves. If you don't know what you're doing, you're pretty likely, not pretty likely, that's not the way to say it, you're more likely to hurt yourself. And then the medical staff is already labored by the people who have been hurt during the disaster, and now they have to care for people who are coming in, they don't know what they're doing, and they injure themselves because they don't understand the proper protocols. So for all of these reasons, you need to have systems in place. You have to have infrastructure. You have to have people who understand what they're doing to tell you, there's a place for you. Yes, you can come volunteer with our organization and move forward. That is what we're trying to create. So the do's and don'ts of response, I put this in here is just to give you an idea of things you might want to do and shouldn't do, or things that you definitely should do immediately after you see that a disaster has occurred. The first is do not spontaneously volunteer. We went over that just a minute ago, but you need to wait for the local communities to build their infrastructure, and you need to ensure that a system is prepared to receive you to be a part of that system. Very important. Next is do not send in-kind donations. A lot of people want to send stuff. They're like, I have 10 shovels. Definitely those people need shovels. Send my shovels. You know, the problem is this creates a lot of tasks and a lot of things that need to be done, and the people don't need to be focusing on that at this moment. They need to be able to do what they need to do, and they need to do it quickly because they're focusing on survival. So a lot of times these don't match the needs of the environment. It takes hours to find what is needed, and it distracts from more important work. So you shouldn't be doing that, but what you should be doing is sending monetary donations. Do that. Every single time that there's a disaster and you feel that I need to donate, that's correct. You know, you might have other feelings that are going on, but definitely monetary. If you are in the outside environment and there hasn't been a moment whenever they've told you, okay, we're ready, send volunteers, then don't go yet, send money. And the reason for that is organizations have the fastest access to what they need, and it reduces man hours. You can get things done faster, you can save more lives. So, how can you guys be part of a response though? If there was a tornado and it struck your neighbor and you needed to be a part of that, you know, as somebody who, if you have no skills whatsoever, if they're in a building that's about to fall down, you're really not supposed to run in there. I mean, even if you feel like you need to. But what you should do is get trained to understand when you should and when you shouldn't. CERT classes. These are free. They are given throughout the communities, in community centers. I would suggest anybody get involved with this. If FreeOK wants to do a meetup, that's the CERT training. That's a really great idea because it prepares you if there's a tornado or a flood. It always prepares you for the types of things that are happening or could happen specifically in the environment that you're within. Right now, I've taken CERT classes in Seattle, and I take ones that are involved in, you know, landslides and earthquakes and volcanoes. Yes, I moved that place. But I looked at disaster maps, I swear, I did. I made sure I wasn't in any danger from floods, landslides, and earthquakes, and I bought a new house for building codes. And then Red Cross training and certification. If you run across somebody who needs first aid or CPR, understanding how to do that is very important, and you never know if it's going to be you who needs this information. So I would highly suggest getting involved in these kinds of trainings because then you can be prepared if you need to be part of a response phase. So on to recovery. Yay! Humanist disaster recovery teams. This is what we're going to be working within. The three basic components of recovery are restore, rebuild, and reshape. I'm going to go over each of those really quickly. The first is restore. This is something we'll definitely be involved in. It's the cleanup, provision of temporary housing, restoration of public services. We won't be involved in restoration of public services, but definitely will be involved in cleanup and provision of temporary housing if that's where we end up going. The next is rebuild. Major repair work takes place, people return to homes and school and work resume. We will probably be involved in this as well. The thing is, whenever it comes to our program, it's going to, at first, take us about 2 weeks. After the Moore tornado, it was only maybe 10 days before everything was cleaned up and they started in the rebuild phase. So we would probably come once they were starting the rebuild phase and be involved in this kind of work, which is also very important. Okay, and then finally is reshape, and that's improve infrastructure and better disaster planning. This is something that Oklahoma politics gets way too involved in a really, really terrible way. You know, the fact that they don't want to build schools that have shelters is sickening to me. But this is what they should be doing, is preparing for the eventuality of another disaster. Okay, so that's recovery. There are obstacles, though, that as a organization who's going into recovery will face. This is something everyone faces. So the first is the need for more volunteers. Every single time that there's a disaster, I usually get an email from somebody asking if we're responding. And I have to usually say, we're not because we're not prepared yet, But eventually I'm going to get those, and it'll be, well, we're looking into it to see the size of and scope of the disaster. Some can be taken care of by the local community, the city, the county, the state, national, and as it goes out, the need for more volunteers is what we're going to be looking at to determine whether or not we should go at all. So the next is skills-based volunteering. So after a disaster, there's all these different jobs, and some of them have different skills, like maybe you need a carpenter, or you need somebody who works in plumbing, or something like that. We have a database that has all of the different types of things that people and skills that they have, and we're able to plug them in and be able to find exactly who can meet these kinds of skills, because you want to have people who are suited for the types of jobs that are available. There are many, many, many jobs that require no skill whatsoever. And so there are a lot of people who don't have any disaster-related skills, and that's perfectly fine. But being able to find these people who can go in and lead these teams, people who have construction work and demolition work and stuff like that, it's very important to be able to identify those people and put them into those roles. Next is time-sensitive coordination. Whenever you have an entire group of people you're trying to get into a specific place at a specific time, prepared to receive them, there are a lot of things that you have to make sure happen at the same moment. So date and duration of deployment, transportation, not only to the housing location, but as also to and from the housing location to the work site. The supplies to be able to do what they're doing. It could be paintbrushes if they're in the rebuild phase, or it could be shovels, and then food, water, and housing. So all of that stuff has to be coordinated at the same time. Next is training. This is something that people actually just kind of stomp on and saying, oh, that's too much work, get it out of here, you know, because it's actually hard to develop the training. But we're an evidence-based program, and we're not going to be doing that for all the following reasons. You're not supposed to. There's a lot of evidence out there that is very beneficial to provide training. It decreases mental health impacts, it increases confidence in fellow volunteers, and then specifically they have discovered that program and disaster-specific training is absolutely the best thing that you can possibly give to your volunteers before you send them out into the field. And so we're not going to just pretend this stuff doesn't exist. It's taken a little bit longer. It's taken, you know, we could have just grabbed some food and water and a couple of shovels and thrown people into a car last year, but we're not going to be doing that. Instead, we're going to be working with trainings. And then finally, partnership. Now this one is an interesting one, because remember a minute ago I was like, there's these jobs. Certainly the disaster didn't say, I need a carpenter. You know, the disaster is not telling us which jobs, and we're not at the point yet. We haven't grown and expanded to the point that we can create those jobs ourselves, so we have to work with a partner. The problem is, most of the people working on the ground after disaster are religious organizations. And so out of maybe 60 different national organizations that are on the ground after disaster, maybe like 55, 57, something like that, are religious organizations. The other ones work with companies, like Google. Google will say, you know, I want to send, I'm a big multinational organization and I want to be able to send volunteers, you know, off. And so there are organizations that are secular who work with companies and who we've reached out to, and they're excited to be able to work with us. So yay, we have partners. I can't give specific ones because as a disaster happens, once we partner with somebody, then we'll be announcing it. But we have several on board who are really excited to be able to move forward with HDR teams. So huzzah! Okay, and so we do have a unique challenge, though. Clearly, we're going to be the first national non-theistic program in a landscape of faith-based organizations, volunteers, and survivors. That's going to be interesting. You know, how are we going to prepare for this? And so that's whenever our humanist service values come into play. This is when people are wondering, like, what are they doing, or why do they need to be there? What we're bringing and what we're adding to this is something very specific. We're bringing something that hasn't been tried, and we think that it, honestly, if religious organizations wanted to take these values, strip off the word humanist and use them, go for it. Please do. They are humanist values, but if you want to pretend or whatever, use them anyway, because it'll benefit everybody. So the way we like to think about it is survivor first. Survivor first, what does that mean? It doesn't mean not eating or, you know, putting your immediate, sorry about that. necessities aside so that you can do something for a survivor. It's thinking about the environment as though it belongs to the survivor. So the experience belongs to the survivor. I'll go over that for just a moment so you can understand what I mean. Whenever my house was destroyed, what I see are all of my memories, all of my plans, every connection that I had, every story that I ever told, every story that I was living, right down to my favorite clothes and the feeling of being me. Oh, sorry. That's what I saw. But somebody coming in from the outside, it's just a giant pile of crap. I understand that that's really what it looks like from the outside, but it's not to me. It's my life. And so understanding that every single survivor, that's their life for real. We're not walking into a big pile of crap, we're walking into their world. And understanding that that's their world that we're walking into is the first step in understanding what we should be doing. And so, as a survivor, it's really funny. I'm going to give you 3 examples of survivors so you can understand how every survivor sees their world differently. Whenever I looked at it, I could think immediately of 3 or 4 things that I needed out of that house. I didn't care what it took. I needed it dug out of there. There was a very specific ring that I wanted to be buried with, or if I was cremated, shove that thing in the jar because that's part of me, you know, and I needed them to find that, and they spent an hour and did dig it out of some insulation, and they found it. Huzzah! But right, it was these little things that I was like, if I have those and I can walk away, I'm gonna feel okay. Like whenever it came down to the pictures that I was taking of those quilted clothes, it's like, if I just take these pictures, I'll feel okay. It's me defining how I feel okay. How can I walk away from this and feel okay? My husband, on the other hand, he's like a Zen master. He doesn't care about objects at all. Like, he could not care, there was not a thing in there. He was, meh, I got my cards out of my computer or whatever, I'm good. You know, but he was very connected to paperwork, and he's like, don't touch the papers, the papers, oh my God, the papers. And so, like, people would move things around, and they'd see papers on the other side of the house, and he's like, I know they moved them, you know, and he'd be panicking because he had told all these volunteers, if they're papers, stick them in a stack, I need these papers, you know, it's just, that's his way of processing it. He needed papers, I couldn't care less about papers. And then our neighbor, he didn't go there once, he didn't show up. He said, bulldoze it down. I don't want to see my family's belongings looking like that. I don't want to see all of my life. I don't want to like process what that might look like. I don't want to see what I lost. I don't want to see it's broken. I don't care about papers. I'll go fill out more forms. I don't care. Bulldoze it to the ground. I'm done. And that's the way he needs it to be. And so what that means, though, is every single human being is going through a different experience. Every survivor feels it in a different way. Every single person is processing it through themselves in the only way that their brain can make sense of it. So how do you help everyone who is an individual? The first thing you have to do is listen to them and take them seriously, because Brian and I don't know how many times we said what we needed, and eventually we just stopped, you know? Whenever I told that woman that I didn't go to church, she should have just stopped. This is my world, and then she's coming in and trying to put her world all over me, and that's the last thing I need at that moment. The last thing any survivor needs is for you to try to go and not listen to what they're saying. Everything they're saying is the most important thing. Like, if they tell you if it takes more time, it's okay if it takes more time. You do the thing that they need. You're there to help them. And so finally, be the extra hands. You're their hands. You're not a bunch of thoughts that are coming in and saying, I've come to shovel your house for you because I've decided that you needed me to shovel. If that's not what they need, then that's not what you're doing. That's not what you're there for. You're there to help them, and they're the only people who can tell you how to help. So that's what we're bringing. That's not scary. Yeah. And I'm sorry, but I think absolutely every volunteer should do this. And so this has to happen, period. So what we're going to be doing is, like I said, we've developed trainings. Right now they're in the final editing process, and we're hopefully going to be unveiling them at FBBCon on July 25th in Boston, so that'll be really exciting. The first training is Introduction to HDR Teams. Like I said before, program and disaster specific are the best, so we're starting with program specific. That'll go specifically over humanistic values, how to understand how to interact with people based upon what their needs are, because maybe there are people who will say, I can't work with humanists. That's okay, that's what they need. We're not going to be saying, well, you're a bad person because you won't let me help you. You know, that's us putting our world all over them, and you can't do that at that moment. They need whatever they need at that moment. What's coming out of their mouth is what they need. It's just there, listen to that. Whatever that is the most important thing. And to tell them what we need is not what we need to be doing. Next is HDR team member training. That's the time-sensitive coordination that I was talking about before. This is to make sure that everybody arrives when they're supposed to, with the supplies that they need, and to make sure that they are all coordinated effectively. And then finally is introduction to disaster. And like I said, that's disaster-specific training that'll tell you what to expect, what kind of differences in the supplies that you'll need, the type of differences in what you'll see on the ground, so that you understand what kind of environment you're going into before you get there. Okay, and so those are the trainings that we're developing currently. There are definitely other ones that are in the works. We want to move into where we are training a full team, like if we had a BBN network team. We want to move into a space where we can provide a training for them to understand what to do if it's in their own backyard. But that's in the future. These are the ones that are coming out now. This year, what you can expect are 2 different deployments. The first one is going to be us testing all of our systems. More than likely, we're going to go to something that's already occurred. It could perhaps be the flooding in Houston, where they need people in the still to be shoveling out houses or rebuilding. That's just to train our, to test our systems, make sure that everything works. And then the second one will be a larger deployment after a disaster occurs. I mean, I always like to say I hope no disasters occur. So if nothing happened, I would be like, awesome, universe, you guys, you were so nice this year. But, eventually something will happen, unfortunately. And whenever that happens, we'll be prepared. So long as our systems don't break in our testing, we'll be prepared to move into an immediate situation. And so, as we continue to grow, we're going to be monitoring our program in 3 different ways. The first are logistics. We're going to continue to move forward to be able to grow to a point where we're like those partners that I was talking about before. Eventually, we would love to be the person who's handing out jobs, and we have an SSA group who comes and says, we would like to volunteer with you, and then we give them jobs. To get to a point where we could train them to be able to come and do that and for us to interact with them, that's the dream, is to be able to be that kind of partner to the non-theistic community. And so as we continue to grow, we'll continue to work out those logistics. The next are field reports. As people are on the ground, whenever they run into anything, we're going to have them filling out field journals. And then in the evenings, they're going to discuss the types of challenges that they ran into, how they handled it, and then brainstorming what they can do in the future so that we can continue to develop our trainings based upon experience that they have in the field. And then finally, our surveys, both after they get home and then 6 months after, to determine what was missing from our trainings, what worked from our trainings, and anything that anyone on the ground would like to tell us, so that we continue to grow and to build upon the experiences that our volunteers are having on the ground. So, if you'd like to get involved, you can register for HDR Teams at foundationbeyondbelief.org/HDR Teams. I suggest everyone do this, because if we don't need you, then we don't need you. But if we do, and you have a way for us to reach you because something happened near you and we're going to be sending a team, and you just end up having to be off and it works with your schedule and everything like that, we'd love to know, and we'd love to be able to reach you. So if you fill out, we'll be able to put you in our database, which we'll be able to find out if you fit the program. And then if you have any ideas, questions, you can submit them at hdrteams@foundationbeyondbelief.org. And I'm Rebecca Vitsmun, Development Coordinator.